Thursday Night Tailgate, where the spotlight is always on the positive. Tune in Thursday night from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time to hear your favorite NFL legends, players, and coaches sharing their stories. Now back to Chris and Bob.
I wouldn't joke about anything else that happens here tonight.
All right, we are back here on Thursday Night Tailgate, and now making a return visit with us is author Ron Lippock. Let me remind you about Ron's background. He's written a wonderful book titled Steelers Takeaways, Players' Memories Through the Decades. It is available on Amazon.com, and in the book, he shares stories about several former Steelers that we've been blessed to have on this show, including tonight's guest, J.T. Thomas, plus TNT Hall of Famer Rocky Bleier and our wonderful friend Elsie Greenwood, who we miss dearly. Ron also publishes a newsletter called Pittsburgh Sports Daily Bulletin, and he has interviewed hundreds of former Pittsburgh athletes, coaches, and media members, and just about every living member of the Steelers organization. And we are excited he is back with us again tonight here on Thursday Night Tailgate. Hey, Ron, Chris, and Bob, thanks for coming back on the show.
Hey, Ron.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
So, Ron, I got to start off, getting your memories of J.T. Thomas, who joined us a little bit earlier in the show. What are some of your favorite J.T. Thomas stories?
Well, I think in the interview with JT that I did, and this was some time ago, he was so poignant and so just very deep. And what I really appreciated about JT was the sort of the notion that when the Steelers were close, they got close because of some ways that people weren't really aware of. I mean, they used to go to a party hosted by a doctor, and they had a priest who sort of got them all together. That team wasn't as unified early on until all those sort of behind-the-scenes things happened. And JT really brought a lot of that to life to me, something I wasn't aware of. And so hearing JT talk about sort of the racial aspect of the times and how the Steelers were able to work through that and become a really unified team through these sort of side channels of conversation and just getting together was really fascinating to me.
And Ron, one of the things I read in your book was, Elsie Greenwood and how he credited Chuck Noll for bringing in a lot of guys from smaller schools, like Elsie, who was from Arkansas Pine Bluff, and, Joe Green being from North Texas State, and Mel Brunt from Southern College, Lambert being from Kent State, just to name a couple of those guys. But, those guys all came in sort of with something to prove, feeling like, hey, we're not from the Penn States and the USCs and that sort of thing. So they sort of had a chip on their shoulder, it seemed like, when they got to training camp and became a member of the Steelers. Talk about Chuck's ability and the ability of their scouts to find the right players at some of the lesser-known schools.
Well, I think it sort of stepping back, I thought about this and why the Steelers were able to have the success they have and continue to. And I think a large part is because they're innovative. They don't get a lot of credit for that. So they bring in, Bill Nine, who was sort of the architect behind that drafting of the guys that no other team was really looking at the time. And the reason for their ability to be innovative is because they had the trust of Art Rooney. And so I think really what started the whole Steelers piece of the whole Steelers dynasty was the trust that Art Rooney gave to Chuck Noll to say, look, you're safe. You're safe for a while. Do what you need to do. And that gave Chuck Noll the freedom to innovate. And he was an incredibly innovative guy. And I think he doesn't get enough credit for that. He brought in a strength and conditioning coach. He brought a weightlifter from the Olympics. He brought in a hypnotist. He brought in things that no one was aware of or no one really gives him credit for that really changed the whole landscape of that team. And part of that was the Bill Nine going to those sort of smaller schools that historically black college universities. And that's something that a lot of people weren't doing. And he was able to do that because he was given the freedom to do that from the front office.
And Ron, like I say, in following you on Twitter and seeing the things that you tweet out and having, read the book, it seems like you have probably interviewed more former Steelers and the Steeler alumni than probably anybody. And in doing those interviews and writing the things that you wrote, did anyone ever say anything to you that really caught you off guard? Like, wow, really? I had no idea that happened.
Well, I think really it was more the guys that weren't happy with the Steelers. And there are a few of those. Roy Jefferson, who was traded away because he had a complete yelling match with Chuck Noll and told Noll to trade him because he didn't like the way the players were treated in camp. And One guy fell in the 102-degree heat and passed out, and Roy Jefferson had enough and just went after Chuck Noll. And there's another story where I believe it was Richard Huntley who had some really negative things to say about Jerome Bettis. And so there's every once in a while you get these people who aren't happy with the environment. Jeremy Statt was another guy who was a second-round draft pick from the Steelers who had some issues with the way the Steelers ran their organization. He's sort of a political guy, and he didn't like some of the politics of the way the Steelers ran their organization. So those are the things that really catch my eye, are the people who speak to these really surprising, I didn't like it there, I wasn't appreciative of what happened there, because you hear so many good things, but not everyone has those great experiences.
Bob, questions for Ron?
Yeah, and Ron, you covered some of this already, but you talked to so many guys that had played for Noll, and you must get kind of a consensus on the guy as far as what he's like as a man and as a coach. If you had to kind of narrow everything down about his characteristics, his personal characteristics as a man and as a coach, what can you tell us about him that everyone pretty much agrees on?
He's a teacher. He was a teacher. He loved to teach. You could be standing there taking pictures, and players would speak to this. That he would tell you how to take a better picture. He would tell you how to golf better. Whatever you were doing, he loved the teaching, and that was what drove him. So I think the art of teaching, the art of communicating, he wasn't, as we all know, he wasn't a flashy, rah-rah kind of guy. As a matter of fact, there's a funny story where he tried one time in the locker room to tell a funny story, and it fell flat, and everyone just looked at him with blank stares because they had no idea what just happened. That's just who he is. He's a teacher, and that's, I think everyone, to a man that I've spoken to that spoke about Chuck Noll in some form or fashion, spoke to him in that regard.
Ron, we've been privileged to talk to Rocky Bleier both on this show and on a TV side. And with him, of course, as you know, it goes beyond football. You get goosebumps. Him talking about getting blown up in rice paddies in Vietnam, it goes well beyond the football field. But have you ever seen a guy that can tell stories like him?
No, he's great. I will say another good storyteller that you guys should get on sometimes, Gary Dunn, who tells a good, fun story. He's got more jokes and more just great experiences of him battling Webster on the freeway and fighting each other on the side of the Pittsburgh Turnpike because Webster made him look bad in practice. He's got great stories of Steve Corson and the way Steve Corson was back then. I don't know where he pulls all these stories out of, but he's just a fountain of fun stories on the team. And so I think he would be someone in a different way. He's not as deep, but, in the way that he tells these stories, because they're more fun stories, but he's one guy. And John Kolb is another guy who he's just, he and J.T. Thomas, and he actually spoke about J.T. Thomas in our interview. But he's just, wow, it's like speaking to the Dalai Lama when you speak to this guy. He just gives you such depth and such intensity. It's just incredible. He's just a fun guy to talk to.
Ron, switching gears a little bit, I want to get your thoughts on this year's team. The loss to the Jaguars in the playoffs last year still stings because of how poorly the defense played. Do you think the players that they brought in and they drafted can step in and make a difference on that defense and get these guys to the next step, maybe getting back to a Super Bowl?
It's going to have to be mostly the guys there that were there last year. There's a couple guys. I think Morgan Burnett is going to help a little bit in sort of that communication piece. But a lot of times when people talk about communication, they're really just saying someone screwed up, right? And I think what's happening is there's a lot of players screwing up. And Steelers are also the worst tackling team in the NFL, the most missed tackles of any team in the NFL. So this isn't about getting new people. I think this is a lot about fundamentals. It's about communication, about knowing your role, about knowing the playbook, and about doing the fundamentals, tackling the correct way. These are things that a rookie is frankly not going to be able to help much with, because this is the strategy, the sort of the deep thinking side of the game, and they're not going to have a rookie be a linchpin of that kind of thing when they can't even communicate with the veterans. So I think it's going to really be incumbent upon someone like Morgan Burnett, Sean Davis in the back end there. They're just going to have to get their signal calls better and just do the fundamentals better. And that's what I hope I will see. I'm actually going to be in camp, reporting on camp next week. I'm hoping we're going to see a lot more on the fundamentals as opposed to the physical.
And this is going to be a pretty important season for Bud Dupree. He's been somewhat of a disappointment so far, just like Jarvis Jones was. Do you think, he and T.J. Watt flipping sides of the line of scrimmage or flipping ends of the line of scrimmage is going to make a difference, and we'll see a little more production out of both of them this season?
I think a little bit. I worry that's going to help Bud Dupree and hurt T.J. Watt, but I think the logic, as I understand it, is that left tackles are usually not as big and bulky as the right tackles. And Bud Dupree is not a guy who's going to wow you with a flash move. His main thing is to overpower. So I think they're trying to line him up over a guy that he can be a little bit more physical with and win those battles. And Watt will be on the other side, dropping back a little bit more in coverage, where I think he's, probably a lot more effective than Dupree would be. My concern, though, is can Watt at his size be a big right tackle? He's going to have to use a lot of speed moves to make that happen. He's not going to overpower guys at that position.
And Ron, what about the situation with Le'Veon Bell? Now that Todd Gurley has signed a 4-year, $60 million deal, do you think the Steelers will step up and in the offseason give Bell a similar number, or is he gone?
He's gone. I think he's gone, and I think, there's two sides to this. I think what people don't realize is, yes, he's not a big play guy, and that is true, but no one got more first downs the past few years in the NFL than he did. And that's a big number to replace. More than Todd Gurley, more than Antonio Brown, more than anyone. So this is a guy that, yes, he doesn't make big 50, 60-yard plays a lot, but this is a guy that takes runs that would be negative yards or 1 yards for most backs and turns them into 3 or 4 yard gains. And that's a huge difference on first downs. And people don't really put a lot of credence into that, I don't think. And I think that's what's going to be lost with him unless they can find a guy who has some similar skills. Or they're going to probably next year have to do a sort of a two-back set like they used to with the Moelde Moore and Van Morris type of situation, or Eric Bigram. I think that's what they're going to have to go to.
And Ron, over the last week, we've heard James Harrison say the reason Bill Belichick and the Patriots are better is because Mike Tomlin lacks the discipline that they have over there in New England. What do you make of that statement from Harrison? Sour grapes, or you think he's onto something?
Yes, probably. But I think maybe discipline is being misunderstood to an extent. I don't think, Antonio Brown flying in on helicopters upset people on Twitter. I don't get that. He's got a Hall of Fame player who gives it all every play. This isn't about people, exploring rap careers on the side. That's not the discipline that this team is lacking in. This is what I said earlier. This team is lacking in fundamentals and basics at times. The tackling. It's the worst tackling team in the NFL. I mean, literally missed tackles in the NFL. That's fundamentals. That's discipline. And that's what I hope he was referring to in Harrison, because I think that's what this team needs, is the discipline to do the fundamentals, do the basics, and focusing on those. And I'm really, really hoping in training camp this year, and hoping I'm seeing it next week, is a lot more focus with guys like Bradley, who's in to develop the secondary a little bit more. More focus on technique, more focus on fundamentals and the basics, as opposed to how hard we can hit each other and that physical stuff that, is also important, but it's got, at this stage with this team, take a back seat to deeper dives into those techniques and fundamentals for this team to succeed on defense.
Bob, one more for Ron before we let him go?
Sure, Ron. Due to the success and interest in a book like Steelers Takeaway, I was just wondering if you had future aspirations to do something similar, maybe another sport, another team, or due to the success, and do you have any interest in doing that?
I do. I mean, it's funny because since the book, and there's over 400 people that were interviewed for that book. Mm-hmm. I've interviewed probably 150 to 200 more Steelers since. Guys from the 50s and 60s, coaches, on through today. So I'm in this quandary. What do I do with all those interviews, right? Now, they're all on the site, right? You can go see those. But, do I go back and do a Steelers Takeaways 2? Or, I've also thought about, do I do something on other teams or other things entirely different, And so I do think about that, but I also think about the fact that I've got 3 kids and a dog and a day job and everything else in between. So, unless I'm winning the lottery anytime soon, I could sit at home and type. It's, it all sounds very daunting right now.
Ron, remind our listeners how they can get a copy of your book, plus also follow you online and over social media.
Well, the book can be found on Amazon, all the typical Barnes & Nobles type places. It's called Steelers Takeaways. And my Twitter handle is Pittsburgh Sports. You can hear me talk and rant and rave and speak and see all the interviews. I'm also working a lot with Jim Wexell now on 24/7 Sports, so in Scout.com. So you'll see a lot of my interviews run with Jim on his Steelers coverage. And actually, I'll be in training camp next week, so you might want to sort of pay attention a little bit to what I'm seeing there, as I'll be doing that for Jim as well next week.
Well, Ron, thank you so much for coming back and sharing more of your stories with us here on the show. It's been great having you back, and it's also great following you on Twitter. And we can't thank you enough for sharing your stories and your insights with us. We hope you'll come back and do it, whether it's after training camp or early on in the season. Love to hear what you think.
Well, I'd love to. Thanks. And it's funny following all these great athletes, and now you got this book writer guy coming up. So I appreciate you having me on and hearing the story.
Our pleasure.
Absolutely, it is.
Right, take care.
Ron, take care. All the best to you and your family. We'll catch up soon.
Take care, Ron.
All right. Likewise. Take care.
That is Ron Lippock. And again, the title of the book is Steelers Takeaways, Player Memories Through the Decades. Again, available on Amazon.com, and you can follow him online at Pittsburgh Sports. Bob, great stuff from him and a lot of great stories. Love to get Gary Dunn or John Kolb on the show. That's got to be my takeaway from this episode, is to try to get in touch with those guys.
Yeah, great guy to talk to as far as when a guy that's done 400 interviews, Chris, he'll direct you to the good ones and people that would be very entertaining. But as when I first read that he had spoke to that many people, I was wondering, there's got to be another book down the road or something that's just a lot of information. But he's got some great stories.
All right, when Bob and I come back, we'll be turning on the Thursday Night Tailgate Spotlight on the Positive, so you can hear which players are doing great things out there in their communities and around the world. We'll do that. We'll wrap up the show on the other side of these words from our friends over at the Salt Creek Golf Retreat and Doubleback Winery.